Just recently, a new trademark was found around the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, this specifically being a new merchandise trademark, so Bethesda can sell Oblivion merch, which kind of just came out of nowhere. And of course, with that happening, QuakeCon on the horizon, there's been a whole renewed discussion around a potential Oblivion remake or remaster. And although, in all likelihood, that'll end up being nothing, it did incite me or inspire me to make this video. For the past few years, we've had this constant flow of leaks or just speculation and information around a potential Fallout 3 or New Vegas remake / remaster. Many times we found interesting things in the source code of Bethesda's website, some actual leaks from 4chan or other not so reputable websites that do describe how a New Vegas remaster is on the way to make up for Fallout 76. I've actually seen a couple of those over the past couple of years. I think many of us have this lingering hope that maybe one day we'll get this bundled $60 package of both a New Vegas and Fallout 3 remaster. I know I, for one, have definitely seen a lot of posts or tweets about that. And just in general, it feels like this discussion around a potential remaster or remake is almost always there. And in this video, I want to almost put it to bed, to describe to you why it is so unlikely for Bethesda to actually pursue this, or at least make you just a bit more informed. In preparation for this, I reached out to some of those actually recreating these games for Fallout 4, specifically the Fallout 3 remake team, to get their input because they probably know best how likely or unlikely this is. And if nothing else, I hope this video just makes you better informed on the topic. So one of the pretty common lines we see is, well, if the mod authors are doing it, if we have projects like Fallout 4 the Capital Wasteland project or Fallout 4 New Vegas, which are both projects recreating a former Fallout, and those are just two of the more relevant ones for this video. There's other things like many on the side of Skyrim, or even Project Aria, which is the Fallout 2 remake mod. Well, one of the big reasons Bethesda isn't going to do this, or in all likelihood isn't going to do this, is it's really hard. To me, it seems like one of the common lines of thinking is looking at how much progress or some of these gameplay videos the mod projects put out. And these are just community-driven projects with no money associated with them. Users see that and think to themselves, well, of course, if they're able to do this, Bethesda should be able to do it much easier, right? And although that is true, it also isn't totally true. One of the big obstacles with this is that Oblivion, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and even kind of Morrowind were all in the Gamebryo engine. Morrowind technically used NetImmerse, which is actually a slightly older version of Gamebryo, but in general, all of these are using an older version of the Creation engine, which is what Bethesda has been using since Skyrim. And there's actually quite a few issues around this in and of itself. Even if Bethesda was just like, hey, we want to go back to Fallout New Vegas and basically just port all of that content into Fallout 4 as a big mod, even if the textures will look bad, they technically can't even do that, as a wide variety of the things that make it work on the Gamebryo engine are just no longer supported by the more modern standard with the Creation engine. So there'd be a ton of incompatibilities that they'd either have to remake or go through a painstaking and lengthy process to convert a ton of files. The two engines are not backwards compatible, large in part. Some of the examples are many of the scripts from those past games won't work. The NIF format is different, so some of the objects would have to be converted to actually be imported. Even for certain other things, design standards have gone up, so a lot of that older content is either just lower poly, it doesn't look as good, not just in textures, but the actual models. If you look at the Fallout 3 10mm pistol and compare that to the now newly created one by modders, there's a huge difference between the two. And just putting on new textures on that old one wouldn't be enough. Bethesda would have to remake it from scratch, more or less. One of the few things that could be used by Bethesda that mod authors can't take advantage of is the world space. Specifically, many of the structures are functionally compatible, and one mod author is actually doing this, more or less porting the world of an older Fallout game into Fallout 4's engine. And you could just tell, it definitely would need some additional work to make it work appropriately. It looks okay, it is passable, but that's one small part of the larger scene. And even further, this is actually one of the things Bethesda already did. As I'm sure many of you remember, we did have that return to the GNR in Creation Club. And in this, Bethesda actually ported this area within Fallout 3 into Fallout 4 and made several improvements to those buildings. It was possible here, although many assets that you are actually seeing, like the buses or even some of the rubbles, aren't from Fallout 3, they're just repurposed from other parts of Fallout 4. But even with this, quite a bit of work had to be done in actually making it so these buildings held up to modern standards. standards. And put simply, one of the massive obstacles Bethesda would face is so much content would just have to be remade from scratch. In fact, a vast majority of content would need to be remade from scratch, which creates such a hurdle when it comes to this. When you hear those discussions about a bundle of Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 remade, I think that is absolutely ludicrous because I think people are downplaying how much work would actually go into those. It's not like this could be handled by a small dev team, but it would be a very large and considerable undertaking. Again, because so much of that old content is basically unusable. You just have to base this new content off of what you had previously. But of course also, we do have this fairly famous quote by Todd Howard on remakes or remasters, where he does say this.
Have you considered going back and remastering older games? I know there's a lot of Morrowind fans out there who will absolutely kill me if I don't say something about it.
We're actually more interested in working with platforms to have, Morrowind runs backwards compatible now.
Yeah.
So that's whereas I like remasters, I like the charm of the way it was.
Back then.
Personally, like when you watch an old movie.
Yeah.
And so I'm much more interested in how can we work with Microsoft, Sony, or PCs to make sure that game works well. That if you want to play it the way it was, you can install it and play it and all of that, as opposed to it's that same game, but it looks really, really different. That's just my own personal preference.
Okay.
And with that perspective, it actually does get interesting, because technically that is possible, and Bethesda has done this somewhat already, as we saw with Skyrim Special Edition. Skyrim Special Edition was a remaster of Skyrim, coming about 5 years after its initial release. It's not like everything Bethesda says always ends up panning out completely, so even though Todd said that, perhaps he doesn't really mean it. Except when it comes to Skyrim Special Edition, there actually is a bit of an interesting backstory, as it doesn't really seem like Skyrim Special Edition was actually intended to be a remaster. Originally, when they were developing Fallout 4, the first thing they did was port Skyrim to the newer gen of consoles, because of course originally Skyrim was not available on the Xbox One and PS4, and it seems like Skyrim Special Edition really came from that. It was initially a port to help with the development of Fallout 4 very early on, to test some of those new and fundamental features, and then they had a separate division with the Montreal branch, get some systems working like mods on consoles, which they already had to do for Fallout 4, as well as some other changes, and then now you have a full $60 product that became amazingly successful on consoles due to the inclusion of mod support. Although technically when it comes to not a remake, but just a remaster. This is very doable by Bethesda, bringing some of the same improvements they brought as they did with Skyrim, like God rays, better occlusion, SSAO, 64-bit, and even the ability to use more than 4 GB of RAM, which was imperative for the Skyrim modding scene. For a hypothetical Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas Remaster, they could do that, and even you do have the avenue of, well, now it's available on consoles with mod support. And hypothetically, this big backlog of mods we have on PC for Fallout New Vegas could suddenly become available to those consoles. Although the thing with this is, how excited for that would you really be? I know some people would, especially those who are locked or exclusive to certain consoles, but large in part, if Bethesda went this route of just a remaster and a fairly simple remaster of a Fallout 3 or a Fallout New Vegas, they would large in part just be doing what mods already do on PC. We already have mods opening up past 4 GB of RAM. There are a wide variety of texture or lighting mods, so you can make your Fallout New Vegas look way better than it did by default. Even add in custom features like throwing weapons or sprint. One of the pretty cool mods to come out recently made it so there's actually a functional epilogue with consequences based off the decisions you made during the base game. You'll see a changed world, and it's awesome. But I can only imagine that this wouldn't land perfectly, and I think Bethesda knows that. It definitely wouldn't be the big and easy win that they're hoping for. I think a lot of people would go into this hoping for something like this when it came to combat, which has become a pretty cornerstone feature of some of these later Fallouts. It has pretty good combat, especially when you go back to the older Fallout New Vegas or Fallout 3 combat and you get this, which is distinctively different. And although there are mods that can make it better, even added new animations, it still doesn't come close to what we have in Fallout 4 or some of those other engine upgrades. As large in part, a remaster can definitely improve things, it can make it more moddable or even open up mods to consoles, but it's still not even going to come close to something like this, what a full remake of the games can do. And I think really if they went this route with just a simpler remaster of these older games, it would be bittersweet. Of course, you want some of that built-in functionality, not having to worry about downloading all of these mods just to get your favorite older games running appropriately on more modern hardware, or even on consoles just being able to download mods at all. But at the same time, Fallout 4 isn't exactly new. That game is now approaching 5 years old, and I think for many, that style of gameplay has become a standard for them. So returning to the older style or sequence we had with these older Fallouts would kind of be a degradation. Although people would be excited for these remasters, it would pale in comparison to a proper remake. But who knows, maybe when Todd Howard said he likes the charm of their older games, that's exactly what he meant. Either way, I think this will always be something we have in the background. We of course have the two major mod projects, which makes the idea of a Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas remake always kind of be relevant, because somebody is doing it, it's just not Bethesda or any AAA developer, it's a mod team. And if nothing else, hopefully we'll get playable aspects of those games. If you don't know, the Fallout 3 remake mod is actually focusing on some of the DLCs first, so we'll have that as a comprehensive experience before the larger game, which I'm pretty excited for. It's only a small slice of Fallout 3, but it's probably going to come out a lot sooner than the rest of the mod. And hey, maybe Bethesda is willing to devote their resources to this. One way or another, I think a remaster or remake of some kind is something to get excited for, and with the release of new consoles, it really couldn't come at a better time. I mean, who knows, maybe this QuakeCon Bethesda will come out of left field with Fallout 4 Special Edition, which is Fallout 4 updated to the Fallout 76 engine featuring full-on co-op. Kind of unlikely, but maybe not super unlikely either. Who knows? Either way, I would love for this video to be totally inaccurate and invalidated in just a month or so with QuakeCon, but I think it may hold true for at least the next couple of years. Bethesda has a lot of other projects they're working on. Doing these remasters would take a lot of manpower, a lot of effort, and although they could hypothetically do it, the opportunity cost with doing something like this as opposed to a Starfield or Fallout 5 is kind of high. And again, when you couple that with Todd Howard's comments on remasters in general, I think it's pretty unlikely we see anything in the near future. Hopefully you guys found this one informative. Hopefully it just helps you, give you a bit of background when it comes to these games and what we could expect as we get into the final stretch of the summer reveal season. Until next time, I thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you all later.